Hello everyone, we are going to talk about quantitative research today. Today we will start with a very brief introduction, and for the rest of this semester we will focus on quantitative research. If you remember, we talked about the differences between quantitative research and qualitative research a lot in this semester. When you're doing quantitative research, you want to ask the numbers, the percentage, and describe what's going on. With qualitative methods, you want to go into details about why people do certain things and how they feel. You want to ask people to elaborate their feelings. So I think that would be a good way to think about quantitative research, not in the sense that how to define it, but how is it different from the qualitative method we have learned before. First, it deals with numbers to assess information, not necessarily detailed descriptions anymore, and data can be measured and quantified. It aims to be objective. Remember when we're doing interviews, we talk a lot about how interviewers' personality, how interviewers' own belief can bias research, because qualitative research can be subjective. But quantitative research, it aims to be as objective as possible, and the findings can be evaluated using statistical analysis. Don't be alarmed by this word, even if you're not good at math. If you know how to use Excel, if you know how to click buttons, you will be fine. The goal is to have computers to do the analysis for you. You just need to interpret the result and understand the stats conceptually for this class. If you want to go to graduate school and be a social scientist, eventually, of course, you need to take statistic classes, but it's not required for this class, so don't worry. And quantitative research represents complex problems through variables. Variables are just another name we call factors, different reasons factors. We will explain more about it later. And most importantly, results can be summarized, compared, and generalized. The biggest advantages of doing quantitative research, of course, is because the findings can be generalized to a specific population, and data sets are large, so the results should be representative. If we survey 300 students randomly on campus, their answers to our survey questions should be representative to SFA students in general, as long as we use the random sampling and our questionnaires are well developed. And documentation regarding the research framework and methods can be shared and replicated. Like we talked about many times, scientific research should be public, and people should learn from each other and build on previous knowledge. So being able to share and replicate the result is a really great advantage of quantitative research. And standardized approaches permit the study to be replicated over time, so we can have the same study done every year or every other year to compare how people's attitude or behavior has changed over time. If you are interested in politics, there is a great study have been done for decades now. It's called American Election Studies. American National Election Studies. You can find a lot of data sets online and compare how people has changed. And of course, there are limitations. Quantitative research is not perfect. The data does not provide evidence for why population thinks, feels, or acts in a certain way. If you want to know why, you probably have to go back to qualitative research and ask more detailed questions, ask people to elaborate. And specific demographic groups, particularly vulnerable or disadvantaged groups, may be difficult to reach. I study politics, so I use a lot of political examples. A lot of conservatives live in rural areas, so that's one of the reasons why 2016 election result can be shocking for a lot of pollers, because when they're trying to poll the population, it's very hard for them to reach those people living in the rural area, or people who don't have access to social media or to internet in general. It's very hard to understand what they think and who they will eventually vote for. Of course, there are ways to get around that, but just be aware that quantitative research has this limitation. And studies can be time-consuming and require data collection over long periods of time. This is true for both qualitative research and quantitative research. And there are 4 types of quantitative research in general. There are different ways to categorize quantitative research. Those 4 types are not like standard. You can have another type, it's possible. But in general, those are the 4 types we will talk about today. The first type is descriptive study. You want to explore and describe real-life phenomena. You will recruit a large number of participants and You just ask them what they think, identify how they feel. You have all those scales presented to them and they read themselves. You can find a lot of psychology study that belongs to descriptive studies if they want to understand how happy people are, how depressed they are, their personality traits, and their behaviors in general, their habits. So if you understand how those participants feel and how they do their work and how they deal with stress, you can have a really good understanding of the whole population as well. So descriptive studies can be really valuable. The next kind we call the correlational studies. Is just try to find the relationships between different variables, between different factors, or among multiple variables, multiple factors. But you're not trying to determine cause and effect. And you cannot test interventions. You just want to explore relationships. Let's say for the national election studies, I will send out a survey, ask people how much they like the two candidates in 2016. That'd be then candidate Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. How much you like them? Rate from 0 to 100. You like them 100%. You like them 0%. And then I will ask you a question like how much you like President Obama. Then they may find that the more you liked President Obama, the more you will like Hillary Clinton, and the more you liked President Obama, the less you will like then candidate Donald Trump. So you can see those are the relationships, but you can't really say it's because I like President Obama. That's exactly why I don't like then candidate Donald Trump. You can't really determine which one is the cause, which one is the effect. But still, you can find the relationships, and those relationships are very valuable, can really help you understand the situation, understand the voter behavior, understand human psychology in general. And you can have more study to follow up on the cause and effect if that's what you're interested in. The next one is called quasi-experimental studies. Of course, if you can guess, the next one will be experimental studies. So this is a research that's in between of correlational studies and experimental studies. It examines causal relationships and determine the effect of one variable on another. And you can test interventions or treatments, but you don't have enough control of the variables compared to experimental studies, and you don't use random assignment. The reason quasi-experimental studies are very popular is because usually these type of studies are done in natural environment. Let's say I have two student hall on campus, and I will put one poster, version A in one hall and version B in the other hall about healthy eating. I will then examine how those students go to different student halls or will behave differently. So I can see whether version A will be more effective or version B will be more effective. Essentially, that's two types of treatment I'm testing. And it's a natural environment, but you're not randomly assign students to go to student hall A or student hall B. They already decide to go there themselves. So it's possible those two groups of students are different. And the difference in their behavior may not be explained by your treatment. It's actually due to their natural difference. So that's why we have less control. If you really want to identify the cause and the effect of the treatment, you may want to go to the next one, go to experimental studies. But of course, when you're doing research, doing quasi-experimental research, doing experiment in natural surroundings, there are other advantages as well. We will talk more about that later. Experimental studies is usually considered the most rigorous type of quantitative study because it's highly controlled systematic design. You want to rule out all the alternative explanation by your design. You want to examine causality, control the manipulation of an independent variable. Independent variable is the name we call it. It's really just the treatment. If it's hard for you to understand, just if you have watched any medical shows, just imagine if a doctor developed a new drug or new way of treating certain disease. He wants to test whether that treatment is effective or not. So that's your independent variable. And you want to compare a treatment group and the control group. Treatment group will receive the treatment you developed, and the control group will not receive anything or only receive placebo that they believe they are being treated, but they're actually not. So everything else will remain equal, and you have to randomly assign patients to those two groups. You can't just assign people who have a better chance of surviving or improving to the treatment group, and then assign people who are in worse condition to the control group. Then it's not really a fair comparison. So random assignment is really important for experimental study, and you are more likely to find the reliable causal relationship in the end. Of course, quantitative research in general want to be as rigorous as possible and have much control as possible. So remember those two traits. You want to get them both if you can. And remember, experimental studies have the highest degree of control. So you decrease the probability of errors in the research by the design. Quantitative research follows a very standard process. It's formal, systematic, and involves all the stages of a research project. You can see that to begin with, you have a research question. You propose you want to study a certain problem and for a certain purpose. Then you start to review all the literature to see what previous scholars have done for this topic and find a framework, and you define your objectives, your questions, your hypothesis in detail. You study the variables, you come up with assumptions and the limitations, and you design your research. You sample certain groups of people from the population, you measure all the variables you care about, you collect your data, you analyze the data, and you write your report. So this is the basic process you have to follow. And in the final product, you should have an abstract, have a brief summary presented, then you write an introduction, provide some background information, basically answer the question, why? Why is my question important? Why should you care about my research? And then you tell people your methods, how did you do your study, so other people can judge whether you did it right or you didn't make a mistake. Are you being objective? Did you control all the possible explanations other than the one you proposed, your independent variable? And your result, what did you find? Tell people and have a discussion. Basically tell people, so what? This is what I find. So what? Why does it matter? And what does it really mean in real life situation? And then provide the references, because your study design, your result, your discussion is built upon all built upon other people's research before you. So give the credits to previous scholars as well, so people can really see how the research has evolved over the years, so they know you're not just imagining things. And if they want to go back to the original idea or the previous version of the research, they can go there. So reference list, even though it's the last part of the research report, it's actually very important of scientific research. Alright, that's all I have today. I know it's a very quick and a brief introduction for quantitative research, but all I want you to do now is start to shift your way of thinking from qualitative research to quantitative research. Stop thinking about things as detailed answers, common themes. Rather think about how do you quantify and measure things in the form of numbers, and how do you reach larger population, focus on generalizability and a more rigorous design to control everything, instead of going to people's houses, ask them about their detailed opinions. So this week, your main focus is to shift your focus, shift your way of thinking, and start entering the quantitative research world. I hope you have a good week. See you next week.